My project is entitled The Identity Trap, Addressing the American Gun Debate Through the Lens of Manufactroversy. To briefly set the stage, I finished writing this paper in March, and at that point there had been 104 mass shootings in the United States. Now, as of May, we're at 208. Right now, 94% of American voters support universal background checks, according to a recent poll. But in the face of a statistic like this, why is the debate still so stagnant? And I argue in my piece that it is important to pay attention to the key players in this debate for further insight. Current literature upholds a balanced egalitarian perspective of the gun debate, and this places equal weight on hearing the arguments of both sides. It also assumes that both sides are arguing in the best interest of the public. A recent piece by Eckstein and Partlow-Lefebvre encourages a pragmo-dialectical approach to analyzing the gun debate. They argue that partisans wish to follow the procedures to reasonably resolve a disagreement. I argue that this gives the National Rifle Association, or the NRA, a level of credence it should not have. The NRA and former NRA Executive Vice President Wayne LaPierre have shifted the debate from one of facts to one of values. Further, the NRA sponsorship of legislation that barred the CDC from reporting on gun violence is a pretty damning piece of evidence to this argument. And even further, allegations that Wayne LaPierre has used NRA funds as a personal piggy bank serve to only further bolster that central argument. I argue that there must be a shift in current scholarship to become more critical of the NRA's participation in this debate, as it does not work towards consensus and mutual understanding, but rather prolongs the debate indefinitely. To do this, the NRA discourse fosters the creation and proliferation of a dogmatic conservative identity that they can harness for political and monetary gain. In order to understand the American gun debate in its current state, especially given the NRA's participation in this debate, I use Manufactroversy. This was developed by Dr. Leah Ciccarelli, who works at the University of Washington, and she identifies Manufactroversy as discourse that exploits the dissonance between public and technical spheres in order to further a political agenda. I extend Manufactroversy beyond science, the way she's using it in her definitions, to address the way in which the NRA has attempted to much success to radicalize and separate part of the public by forming a common identity for supporters. I call this extension of Manufactroversy the identity trap. I define the identity trap as a type of manufactured controversy that radicalizes and separates a group from a united public through the establishment and reinforcement of a common identity. To briefly overview what my capstone covers, first I talk about Manufactroversy and provide a thick description for that given Leah Ciccarelli's usage of it and definition of it. Then I move on to name the phenomenon and extend that idea of Manufactroversy in the case of this specific debate. And third, I go on to analyze the NRA's discourse. Firstly, in dealing with Manufactroversy, a speaker argues in a Manufactroversy that there is disagreement on an issue within the technical sphere, when in reality there is consensus on that issue. This ultimately serves to cloud public view of an issue. And there are two types that Ciccarelli outlines. First, there's the epistemological filibuster, and then there's also the fair play wedge. These are both, they both function in the same way, and that is to further divide the technical sphere from the public sphere, which we can see in examples like climate change and also in teaching intelligent design in schools. So although the NRA's type of Manufactroversy does not necessarily fit the scientific context that Ciccarelli uses Manufactroversy in, she has four central aspects of a Manufactroversy that the NRA does meet. And because of this, I argue that the NRA's participation in this debate does constitute a Manufactroversy. So these four identifiers are: one, there's a claim created based on false or misleading information; two, Manufactroversies are driven by extreme ideology or profit; three, there's an expenditure of major marketing dollars; and four, there are imagined conspiracy theories. The NRA, like I said, meets all of these requirements. So first, their consistent use of long debunked frameworks meets this idea of something being constructed. Second, the use of NRA funding for personal gain, as I mentioned, using NRA funds as a personal piggy bank is a good example of a motivation there. Third, their ad spending after Sandy Hook more than quadrupled. So this explains that aspect of major marketing dollars. And lastly, there's constant false negative characterization of the opposing side within NRA discourse. You don't have to look far, and many will be very familiar with it. So things like they're coming for your guns and aspects like that that really do constitute these imagined conspiracy theories. So to extend this, I argue that the identity trap relies on a foundational belief of a united, valiant us that fight patriotically against a corrosive and malevolent them. This exacerbates the existing divide between two sides of a given argument to sow discontent while preserving a facade of reasonableness, as it creates a strategic alternative positionality within the gun debate that is built on values instead of facts. So a new understanding of manufactroversy, as I mentioned, whereas the epistemological filibuster and fair play wedge that Ciccarelli defines cover this idea of the technical versus the public, the identity trap is more public. And what I mean by that is that the identity trap in manufactroversies that are identity traps, a vocal radicalized demographic is separated from a united public that is less inclined to take action. So the NRA does this a few ways. First, their type of discourse prompts a decision between two sides. You can either be a hero or you can be a villain. Further, their illusion of trying to work towards consensus is what makes this a trap. They appear as if they're hoping to add something constructive to the debate, when in actuality, their rhetoric purposefully extends the debate indefinitely. So to apply this directly to NRA discourse, I argue that when we view the NRA as a stakeholder who hopes to further debate and ultimately cultivate a resolution of opinion, we are unable to accurately interpret their rhetoric and actions. I argue that we should instead view their purpose in a different way, to convey reasonableness while sowing discontent. A speech that meets a lot of these identifiers of manufactroversy is Wayne LaPierre's post-Sandy Hook press conference address in 2012. So in this speech, the rhetoric seeks to provoke an emotional response and cement that response in a common identity. This language posits a mythical cosmology, much like one from a superhero film or storybook, in which forces of good fight those of evil. I'll come back to this later, but dichotomies are also a massive part of this type of speech. This is a quote from the speech in which you can kind of see the framework that the NRA is presenting for its listeners. So when you hear your glass breaking in your living room at 3 a.m. and call 911, you won't be able to pray hard enough for a gun in the hands of a good guy to get there fast enough to protect you. Coming back to this idea of dichotomies, throughout this entire speech, we can see an us versus them. And this goes hand in hand with good versus bad. So on the us side, we are good, we care about our children, and we share common knowledge. So this is often referenced using the phrase, we know. And on the them side, they are bad, they are murderers, and they value money and superficial things over their children. Clearly, we can understand as a listener which side we're supposed to pick here. Wayne LaPierre's 2012 press conference after Sandy Hook is just one example of the NRA's pattern of identity-building rhetoric. This rhetoric blurs and even obscures the lack of specifics presented, shifting the gun debate from one of facts to one of values. Applying the identity trap to this text allows for the observation of the patterns and rhetorical systems by which the NRA constructs and strengthens a common identity. To conclude, I imagine a few pathways forward. So first, we must shift the debate, as I have mentioned several times, from one of values, where it currently lies, back to one of facts. And in this, for example, you've probably heard the question before, do guns kill people or do people kill people? This is the type of discourse that has made the gun debate so difficult. for lack of a better term. This is because this type of question calls in a whole discussion of agency, right? If guns kill people or people kill people, who is having the agency here? Who is doing the bad thing? And this brings us into a lot of murky values-based arguments, where instead the question should be much simpler. Are more people dead as a result of guns? Further, as I've argued, the most damning piece of evidence against the NRA is their decision to bar the CDC from gathering data on gun violence as a public health crisis. So if we were to reinstitute that ability for the CDC, we would have the ability to much better able ground this discussion in fact. We'd be much better able to ground this discussion in fact. And lastly, I argued that the identity trap can address a lot of other phenomena as well, a lot of other important debates that are occurring right now in the United States. So examples of these are the abortion debate and the mask wearing debate. And we can see how these two different debates have also been moved from one of facts to one of values, which is, I argue, the situation in which the identity trap can be the most helpful. Finally, to conclude, when scrutinizing debates in which consensus seems impossible in the face of irreconcilable values, an application of the identity trap allows for unique insight and freer movement in imagining pathways forward. Thank you.